Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know, the 2025 Australian federal election is coming up fast, and I gotta say, I'm already feeling a bit overwhelmed with it all, to be honest. There are just so many issues to think about and so many different opinions flying around. But for me personally, climate change is right up there at the top of the list. It's such a huge issue and it feels so urgent. And sometimes it doesn't really feel like our current politicians are taking it as seriously as they should be. So that's exactly why we're doing a deep dive into Climate 200 today. You know, that group that's been backing all these independent candidates who are really pushing for strong action on climate change. But I'll be honest, the whole political landscape out there can feel a bit like a jungle sometimes. So luckily, we've got an expert guide with us today to help us make sense of it all. So let's just jump right in. Can you give us the rundown on what exactly Climate 200 is all about?
Well, Climate 200, it really came about from this wave of frustration. You had all these Australians who felt like the major political parties, they just weren't giving climate change the attention it deserved. So they decided to take things into their own hands and basically trying to climate-proof politics for good. That's their big goal.
Okay, climate-proof politics for good. I like the sound of that. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it's about getting behind candidates who are totally committed to serious climate action. But it's actually more than that. It's about shaking things up a bit in terms of integrity and diversity in our political system,
Yeah.
making sure our elected officials actually represent the people they're supposed to be serving.
And they've had some pretty impressive results so far, haven't they? I mean, the 2022 election was a real turning point, it felt like.
Yeah, absolutely. Climate 200 ended up backing a bunch of independent candidates, and 11 of them actually won their seats. So now you have people like Zeli Steggall, David Pocock, Zoe Daniel, and they've become some of the loudest voices in Parliament on climate issues.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, though. Why do we even need a group like Climate 200? I mean, we already have political parties and elected officials. Shouldn't they be representing us on issues like climate change already?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it really gets to the heart of why Climate 200 has resonated with so many Australians. I mean, if you look at what a lot of the donors to Climate 200 are saying, there's this deep sense of frustration. They feel like Australia has been falling behind when it comes to climate action, and that the major parties just aren't moving fast enough or taking it seriously enough.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's like, the planet is literally heating up,
Yeah,
and we're stuck in this political gridlock.
exactly. And that's what Climate 200 is trying to break through. They're backing these candidates who are actually committed to tackling climate change head on.
So it's not just about getting individuals elected then. It's about trying to shift the whole system.
You got it. By supporting these independents, they want to try and loosen the grip that the two major parties have on Australian politics.
Okay, I see.
It's about creating space for new voices and new ideas, and making our democracy a bit more vibrant and responsive to the needs of everyday Australians.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do they actually go about doing that? How does Climate 200 actually support these candidates and help them get elected?
Well, one of the biggest things they do is provide support to grassroots community groups, those groups that are working to get independent candidates elected. So we're talking about providing training resources and even small grants just to help these campaigns get off the ground.
So it's kind of like a launch pad for these grassroots movements.
Exactly. They're trying to empower everyday people to take control of their own political destinies. And one of the big things they learned from the 2022 election is that early support is crucial. These grassroots campaigns need time to gain momentum. So Climate 200 is really focused on getting in early and giving those groups the tools they need to succeed.
I know in doing the research for this deep dive, we came across some pretty inspiring stories about specific community groups who are working with Climate 200. Did any of those stories particularly stand out to you?
There's one that comes to mind. It's about this group in regional Australia. They're fighting to protect their local environment from a proposed mining project. They're so passionate about their community, and they're really concerned about the potential damage this mine could cause, but they feel completely voiceless in the current political system.
That's got to be so frustrating. We feel like the people in power just aren't listening.
Exactly. And that's where Climate 200 comes in. They can provide this group with the resources and training to help them organize and run their own campaign, and potentially even elect an independent candidate who will actually represent their interests.
That's pretty powerful. It seems like Climate 200 is really about connecting with people on that personal level. It's not just about abstract policies. It's about real people and the communities they live in. Okay, so let's talk about the people who are actually backing Climate 200. Is it just a small group of elites, or is it more diverse than that?
That's one of the things I find so interesting about Climate 200. The diversity of their supporters is really striking. We're not talking about billionaires trying to push some hidden agenda.
Hmm.
In 2022, they had over 11,200 Australians donate a total of $13 million. That's a lot of everyday people putting their money where their mouth is.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So what are some of the reasons why people are so drawn to Climate 200?
Well, if you read what some of those donors have to say, you can really get a sense of what's motivating them. Like there's this one quote from a grandmother. She's worried about the kind of planet her grandkids are going to inherit. Then you have someone else who's just fed up with big businesses having so much influence in politics.
Yeah, I think that resonates with a lot of people. It's like you feel like the politicians are more accountable to corporations than there are to the people they're supposed to be representing.
Exactly. And then there's another donor who's actually really excited about the economic opportunities that come along with tackling climate change. They see it as a chance to create jobs and build a more sustainable future for Australia.
It's pretty amazing to see so many different people from all walks of life coming together and supporting this movement. It shows just how much people care about climate change and the future of our country.
It does. It's really inspiring to see.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping that future. All right, so we've talked about what Climate 200 is
Yeah.
and why it's gaining so much momentum. But now I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what all of this means for the future of Australian politics.
Well, it seems like we might be at a real turning point. With the rise of independent candidates, it's shaking up the traditional two-party system and forcing the major parties to actually listen to the concerns of everyday Australians.
And that's a good thing, right?
I think so. It means that our democracy is becoming more vibrant and representative. And that's something we should all be celebrating.
Absolutely. Well said. But we've only just scratched the surface here. There's still so much more to explore. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into Climate 200, where we'll delve even deeper into the potential impact that this movement could have on the 2025 election and beyond. We'll be right back after a short break.
You know, it's not just about climate change, though, is it? I think Climate 200 is tapping into something bigger, this desire for a different kind of politics altogether.
I think you're right. It feels like so many people are just exhausted with the same old partisan fighting and the lack of progress on the issues that really matter.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of climate-proofing politics for good comes in. It's about building a system that's more resilient and adaptable one that can handle the big long-term challenges we're facing.
It's like Climate 200 is asking us to imagine a whole new way of doing politics in Australia, challenging the status quo and saying, hey, what if we tried something different?
Yeah, and the fact that they've already had such a big impact in such a short time shows that a lot of Australians are ready for that change. It's a sign that people are hungry for a more hopeful and collaborative approach to politics.
So as we're heading into this 2025 election, what kind of impact do you think Climate 200 could have?
Well, I think if the 2022 election is anything to go by, they could be a major force to be reckoned with. They've shown they can mobilize resources, get behind strong candidates, and help them win.
And those independents who were elected in 2022, they've definitely made their voices heard, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've been strong advocates for climate action, integrity, and diversity. They've really challenged the government on key issues and forced them to reconsider their positions. It's like they've brought this new energy and sense of urgency to the political debate.
It makes you wonder, what does this all mean for the future of Australian politics? Is this rise of independence just a temporary blip, or is it something bigger, like a fundamental shift?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, it's still early days, but I think it's safe to say that the traditional two-party system is facing a real challenge here.
I mean, thinking about the 2025 elections specifically, do you think we could see even more Climate 200-backed independents winning seats?
It's definitely possible. The success of those independents in 2022 has inspired others. There's a growing feeling that change is possible.
It's exciting to imagine a parliament that's more diverse and representative one that really reflects the values and priorities of everyday Australians.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that this goes beyond just climate change. Climate 200 is part of this broader movement that's pushing for greater transparency, accountability, and integrity in government.
It's about reclaiming our democracy and making sure it works for everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. And the 2025 election is going to be a crucial test to see if this movement can keep growing and actually create lasting change.
I have to say, I'm feeling much more informed and less overwhelmed now than I was at the beginning of this deep dive. It's been fascinating to explore the origins, the mission, and the potential impact of Climate 200. But before we wrap things up, I have one last question for you, and it's a bit of a thought-provoking one. What do you think this rise of independence means for the future of political representation in Australia?
That is a great question, and it's one that I think every Australian voter needs to consider as we head into this next election. Are we happy with the two-party system, or are we ready for something new?
It's like we're at a crossroads.
We are. And the choices we make as voters, they're going to determine which path we take.
So for our listeners who want to learn more about Climate 200 or maybe even get involved, what would you suggest they do?
Well, the first step is to just do your research. The Climate 200 website is a great place to start. They've got a lot of information there about their mission, their values, the candidates they support. You can really get a sense of who they are and what they stand for.
And don't forget, they have that podcast we mentioned earlier.
That's right. It's called Independent Insights, and it's a great way to dive deeper into the issues and hear directly from the people involved.
Okay, I'll definitely have to check that out. Maybe we could even have them on the deep dive sometime. But in all seriousness, this election is our chance to make our voices heard. Whether you support Climate 200 or not, it's important to engage with the issues. Do your research and vote for the candidates who align with your vision for Australia's future. Because at the end of the day, it's us, the voters, who hold the power on it. It's up to us to decide what kind of country we want to live in and what kind of future we want to build. Let's make it a good one. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Climate 200. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.
So we've been talking a lot about Climate 200 and the impact they're having, but what does it actually mean for you listening right now? Like, why should you care about this as we're heading into the 2025 federal election? Well, I think that's what makes this so interesting. Climate 200 is kind of making us rethink how our democracy works. It's like they're saying, what if we had more independent voices in Parliament? People who aren't tied to the big parties and can actually represent the people.
Right, so it's about breaking free from that two-party system and making sure our voices are heard.
Exactly. And this election in 2025, it's a chance for us to decide what kind of political system we really want. Do we just stick with what we've always had, or are we ready for something different, something bolder?
Okay, so let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking, all right, Climate 200 sounds interesting, but where can I learn more?
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
Well, the first thing I'd say is check out their website. They've got tons of information there about their mission, their values, the candidates they support. You can really get a feel for what they're all about.
And don't forget that podcast we mentioned.
Oh, yeah, Independent Insights. That's a great way to dig a little deeper and hear from the candidates themselves. You can get a sense of what they stand for and what they want to achieve.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Climate 200, what's the one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the big thing is the 2025 election. It's a chance for us to take back our democracy, to demand more from our leaders, to support people who share our values, and to build a future where climate action is a top priority.
I love that. And whether you decide to support Climate 200 or not, the important thing is to be informed and get involved. Your vote is your voice, so use it wisely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Climate 200. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.